The room was silent enough to hear the distinct crinkle of parchment. That sound, the turning of a page, was usually boring. But today, inside the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Carter, Ruck and Associates, it sounded like a guillotine blade dropping. Sitting across the table were the Sterling Wyatts, a family who wore their arrogance like armor, who had spent years mocking a young woman for couponing at the grocery store and driving a dented Honda. They were smirking, waiting for their millions. Then, the senior executor cleared his throat, looked over his wire-rimmed glasses, and read a single name. The smirk didn't just fade from Beatrice Sterling's face, it shattered. They thought she was a nobody. They were about to find out she owned the ground they were standing on. The rain in Manhattan doesn't wash things clean, it just makes the grime slicker. That's how Eleanor Vance felt standing outside Le Coucou on Lafayette Street, clutching her umbrella like a weapon. It was a Tuesday, but for the Sterling Wyatt clan, Tuesday was just another excuse to drink vintage claret and belittle the waitstaff. Eleanor checked her reflection in the darkened window of the restaurant. Her coat was a generic beige trench she'd bought at a thrift store in Queens 3 years ago. Underneath, she wore a dress she had sewn herself, copying a pattern from a discard pile at the archives where she worked. She looked presentable, she told herself. She looked dignified. But she didn't look rich. And in Julian's world, that was the only sin that couldn't be forgiven. "You're late," Julian said, as she slid into the booth. He didn't stand up to greet her. He didn't kiss her cheek. He was busy swirling a glass of amber liquid, his eyes fixed on something over her shoulder. Probably a mirror. The subway was stalled at 59th Street, Eleanor said, folding her wet umbrella and trying to tuck it out of sight. "I texted you." "I don't check texts when I'm with family, Eleanor." "It's rude," Julian replied smoothly. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Sitting around the circular table were the people Eleanor had spent the last 6 months trying to impress. There was Beatrice Sterling Wyatt, the matriarch, a woman whose face was pulled so tight by surgeries she looked permanently surprised. Beside her was Alistair, Julian's father, who was currently shouting at a waiter about the temperature of his sparkling water. And next to Julian sat Clara, a childhood friend of the family who wore a Cartier bracelet that cost more than Eleanor's entire student loan debt. "So," Beatrice said, her voice like grinding glass. "Eleanor, still working at that library?" "It's a private archival firm, Mrs. Sterling Wyatt," Eleanor corrected gently. "We specialize in restoring damaged legal documents and genealogy tracing for historical estates." "Dusty papers," Alistair grunted. "Does it pay?" "It pays enough to cover my rent and my loan payments," Eleanor said, reaching for the menu. She scanned the prices and felt a familiar knot in her stomach. The cheapest appetizer was $42. She mentally calculated her bank balance. If she ordered the soup and water, she could make rent this week. If she ordered an entree, she'd be eating ramen for the next 10 days. "Oh, look, she's doing the math," Clara giggled, leaning into Julian. "It's so cute, like watching a squirrel count nuts." Julian offered a tight, embarrassed smile. "Just order the Dover sole, Eleanor. I'll cover it." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I can pay for myself. I'll have the seasonal soup, please." Beatrice let out a sigh that sounded like a tire deflating. "Modesty is a virtue, I suppose. Though in our circle we call it poverty." The table erupted in polite, cruel tittering. Eleanor gripped the tablecloth beneath the surface, her knuckles turning white. She looked at Julian, begging him with her eyes to defend her. To say something. Anything. He looked away. The dinner was a master class in humiliation. They talked about summering in the Hamptons, about the new yacht Alistair was eyeing, a 90-footer called the Sovereign, and about the ghastly people moving into their Upper East Side neighborhood. Eleanor sat in silence, eating her soup, feeling invisible. But the real drama began when the bill arrived. Alistair made a show of patting his pockets. "Ah, Beatrice, darling, I seem to have left my wallet in the Bentley." "Julian?" Julian frowned. "I thought you were treating, Dad. I maxed out the Amex on that trip to Cabo last week. The limit hasn't reset." A heavy silence fell over the table. The bill sat on the silver tray in the center, a small piece of paper that held a number likely equivalent to a down payment on a car. Beatrice laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Well, this is absurd. Clara, surely you—" Clara pouted. "Daddy took my cards. He's mad about the incident in Ibiza." All eyes turned to Eleanor. Beatrice's lips curled into a sneer. "Well, Eleanor, you're always talking about independence. Perhaps this is your moment to shine?" Eleanor stared at them. They were looking at her not with hope, but with amusement. They knew she couldn't afford this dinner. The bill was easily $2,000. They were testing her, pushing her to the breaking point to see if she would crack. I can't," Eleanor whispered. "I don't have that kind of money available right now." "Pathetic," Alistair muttered, suddenly finding a credit card in his jacket pocket. "The girl has zero liquidity. Julian, I told you, you can't build a dynasty with someone who counts pennies." "I know, Dad," Julian said. Eleanor froze. "You know?" Julian turned to her, his face devoid of the charm she had fallen in love with 6 months ago. "Eleanor, look. Us. It's been fun. A nice little experiment. But Mother is right. The charity gala is coming up next month. The press will be there. I need someone on my arm who understands that world. Someone who fits." He placed a hand on Clara's knee. "You're breaking up with me?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "Here, now." "I'm doing you a favor," Julian said, leaning in. "You don't belong here, Eleanor. You're a worker ant trying to live in a beehive. It's exhausting watching you try to keep up with your little thrift store outfits and your obsessive budgeting. It's embarrassing." "Embarrassing?" Beatrice echoed. "Truly." "Now run along, dear. We have business to discuss. Real business." Eleanor stood up. Her legs felt weak. She looked at the faces around the table, the faces of people who had never worked a day in their lives, who judged her worth based on the fabric of her coat. "You're right," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I don't belong here." She turned and walked out. She didn't run. She walked with a straight spine, past the Maître D', past the coat check, and out into the pouring rain. She didn't cry until she was 3 blocks away, sheltered under the awning of a closed newsstand. She cried for the time wasted. She cried for the humiliation. But mostly, she cried because she knew they were right about one thing. In this city, without money, you were nothing. Or so she thought. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Archives and Origins, the boutique firm located in a dusty, narrow building on West 43rd Street. Her eyes were puffy, but her resolve was hardened like steel. She needed work. Work was the only thing that never lied to her. "Morning, Eleanor," Mr. Henderson, the firm's owner, called out. He was a kindly man who smelled of pipe tobacco and old glue. "Big job today. A courier just dropped off the dead files from the massive merger of Blackwood and Thorne." Eleanor nodded. "The law firm that dissolved last week?" "The very same. They're purging their physical archives. We need to sort, catalogue, and destroy the non-essentials. But—" Mr. Henderson lowered his voice. "Be careful. There are rumors that old man Harrison Blackwood kept personal files mixed in with the corporate ones. If you find anything marked private trust, It comes straight to me. Understood? Understood, Eleanor said. She put on her white cotton gloves and retreated to the basement. It was her sanctuary, rows of metal shelving, humidity-controlled air, and the smell of history. For 4 hours, she sorted through mundane legal briefs, land deeds from the 1980s, and corporate tax returns. It was tedious, numbing work, exactly what she needed to forget Julian's face. She was reaching for a box marked HB. Personal, $99.99, when her hand knocked over a slim, leather-bound folder that had been wedged behind the shelf. It fell to the floor with a heavy slap. Eleanor bent down to pick it up. The leather was cracked with age, and the gold embossing on the front had faded, but she could still read the initials. AV. Eleanor frowned. AV. Her own initials were EV for Eleanor Vance. But her mother's name was Amelia Vance. Her heart did a strange little flip. It was a coincidence. Vance was a common name. She opened the folder. The first page was a photograph. It was black and white, grainy, taken perhaps 30 years ago. It showed a man standing on a dock, laughing, the wind blowing his hair. He was handsome, with a strong jaw and eyes that crinkled at the corners. Beside him, looking young and radiant, was a woman in a sundress. Eleanor gasped, dropping the folder onto the metal table. She knew that woman. She saw that face every time she looked at the framed photo on her nightstand. It was her mother, Amelia. But who was the man? Trembling, Eleanor turned the photo over. In faded blue ink, written in a sprawling, confident hand, were the words, Harrison and Amelia, Montauk, 1994. The only time I was truly happy. Harrison Blackwood, the billionaire industrialist, the man whose estate was currently being fought over by every shark in New York City, the man whose dead files she was currently sorting. Eleanor's mother had been a nurse. She had died when Eleanor was 18, leaving behind nothing but debt and a few boxes of books. She had never spoken about Eleanor's father. He was a good man who couldn't stay, was all she ever said. Eleanor flipped to the next document in the folder. It was a birth certificate. Her birth certificate. But it was different from the one she had used to get her driver's license. Name, Eleanor Vance. Mother, Amelia Vance. Father, Harrison J. Blackwood. The room spun. Eleanor grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. She wasn't just a random archivist. She was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in American history. But the real shock came from the third document. It was a legal draft, notarized and signed, titled The Alpha Trust. She began to read, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. In the event of my passing, the entirety of my liquid assets, real estate holdings including the Kensington estate and the Midtown Tower, and the controlling interest in Blackwood Industries shall bypass the public probate process. And then, the paragraph that made her blood run cold. It has come to my attention that my distant cousins, the Sterling Wyatt family, have been leveraging their tenuous connection to my name to secure loans and social standing. Let it be known that Alistair Sterling and his lineage are explicitly excluded from this trust. They are to receive the sum of $1 to ensure they cannot contest the will on the grounds of being forgotten. Eleanor covered her mouth. The Sterling Wyatts, Julian's family. They had claimed for years to be the heirs apparent to the Blackwood fortune. It was the source of their credit, their reputation, their arrogance. Julian had practically bragged that once old Uncle Harrison kicked the bucket, they would be billionaires. She read on. The sole beneficiary of the Alpha Trust, upon the condition that she is found to be of sound moral character and modest living, shall be my daughter, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor stared at the paper. The date on the signature was 2 weeks before Harrison Blackwood died. She looked at her cheap watch. It was 2 p.m. Julian had dumped her because she was poor. He had humiliated her because she drove a Honda. He had cast her aside because she didn't fit into his future dynasty. And sitting right here, in a dusty basement on West 43rd Street, was the proof that Julian's family was broke, and Eleanor was the owner of the very empire they were trying to steal. A slow, cold anger began to burn in Eleanor's chest. It wasn't the hot, tearful sadness of the night before. This was different. This was the fuel of a woman who had been laughed at for the last time. She closed the folder. She didn't take it to Mr. Henderson. Not yet. She took out her phone. She had a notification from Instagram. It was a story posted by Clara. The video showed Clara and Julian clinking champagne glasses on the deck of a boat. The caption read, "Future so bright, we need shades." Blackwood heirs. Power couple. Eleanor looked at the picture of her father. She looked at the trust document. "You want a show?" she whispered to the empty room. "I'll give you a show." She picked up the phone and dialed the number at the top of the legal letterhead, the private line of Harrison Blackwood's personal attorney, a man named Titus Thorne. "Carter, Ruck and Associates, Mr. Thorne's office." A crisp voice answered. "Hello," Eleanor said, her voice steady and commanding. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I have the Alpha document, and I'd like to schedule a meeting today." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Miss Vance," the voice came back, sounding breathless. We have been looking for you for 20 years. Please hold." The game was on. The offices of Carter, Ruck and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a steel monolith on 5th Avenue. The elevator ride alone made Eleanor's ears pop. When the doors slid open, she wasn't greeted by a receptionist, but by a man who looked as if he had been carved out of granite. Titus Thorne was in his 60s, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Eleanor's entire education. He had the eyes of a hawk, sharp, intelligent, and unblinking. "Miss Vance," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm. "You have no idea how long I have waited for this moment." He ushered her into a corner office that overlooked the entirety of Central Park. On his desk sat a single sealed envelope and a glass of water. "Sit, please," Thorne said. Eleanor sat. She clutched the leather folder to her chest. Is it real? Or is this some kind of sick joke? Thorne sat down and folded his hands. Harrison Blackwood was a brilliant man, but he was a lonely one. He met your mother during a summer in Montauk. He loved her deeply, but his father threatened to disown him if he didn't marry a suitable match, specifically a duchess from Luxembourg. Harrison refused the marriage, but your mother, she left. She didn't want to be the reason he lost his empire. She disappeared. He spent the next 20 years looking for her. By the time private investigators found a trace, Amelia had passed away. We knew there was a child, but the trail went cold. He pointed to the folder in Eleanor's hands. "That document is the key to a vault, essentially. But before we proceed, we need a DNA test. It's a formality, but necessary." The test was quick, a swab, a rapid analysis machine in the adjoining private suite. An hour of agonizing silence followed, during which Eleanor drank 3 cups of tea and stared at the skyline, wondering if she was about to wake up in her studio apartment in Queens. Then the door opened. Thorne walked in. He wasn't smiling. Lawyers like him rarely did, but his shoulders were lower, his expression softer. "Hello, Miss Blackwood," he said softly. Eleanor let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for a lifetime. "So it's true," she whispered. "It is," Thorne said. He opened a thick binder on his desk. "Now to business. The estate includes the Blackwood Industries conglomerate, a controlling interest in 3 tech firms, the Kensington Manor in London, the penthouse we are currently standing in, and a liquid trust fund. How much? Eleanor asked. Total assets are valued at roughly $12.4 billion, Thorne said casually, as if discussing the weather. Eleanor grabbed the edge of the desk. Billion? With a B. With a B. And of course the power to crush anyone who stands in your way. Thorne's eyes glinted. Which brings us to the Sterling Wyatts. Eleanor's expression hardened. They think they've won. They're throwing a gala this Saturday. The Blackwood Legacy Ball. They're announcing Julian as the new CEO. Thorne made a sound of disgust. Alastair Sterling has been bleeding the company dry for years as a consultant. Beatrice charges her plastic surgery to the corporate expense account. And Julian, the boy is a vapid, empty suit. If they take control, the company will be bankrupt in 5 years. He leaned forward. The Alpha Trust gives you immediate, total control. We can file the papers today. We can have security escort them out of their homes by dinner. Eleanor thought about it. She thought about the way Beatrice looked down her nose. She thought about Clara's giggling. She thought about Julian leaving her in the rain. Simply firing them wasn't enough. An email from a lawyer wasn't enough. No, Eleanor said slowly. I don't want to just file papers. What do you want to do? They humiliated me in public, Eleanor said. They made me feel small in front of an audience. I want to return the favor. Thorne raised an eyebrow. Go on. The gala on Saturday. The press will be there. Every major network. The Wall Street Journal. Vogue. It's the social event of the season. Good, Eleanor said. Then that's where we'll do it. I want to walk in there, Mr. Thorne. I want to look them in the eye when I take it all away. Thorne looked at her for a long moment. Then a slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. I like your style, Eleanor. But if you're going into the lion's den, we need to get you some armor. He picked up his phone. Get me Pierre, and get the security team. We have a busy week ahead. The next 3 days were a blur. Eleanor Vance ceased to exist. In her place, a weapon was being forged. Thorne moved her into the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel under a pseudonym. You cannot be seen, he warned her. If the Sterling Wyatts get wind of this, they will try to file an injunction. Surprise is our only advantage. Her team arrived on Wednesday morning. First was Marco, a stylist who looked at Eleanor's thrift store cardigan with physical pain. Burn it, Marco said, waving a hand. Burn it all. You are a billionaire, darling. You need to look like you own the oxygen everyone else is breathing. They spent hours fitting dresses, silks, velvets, diamonds that weighed more than Eleanor's hand. No, Eleanor said, rejecting a pink chiffon number. Too soft. I don't want to look like a princess. I want to look like a queen who just executed the king. Marco's eyes lit up. Understood. He pulled out a gown from the back of the rack. It was midnight blue, almost black, strapless, with a structural bodice that looked like architectural steel, flowing into a train that shimmered like a starry night. It was dangerous. It was perfect. While Eleanor was being fitted, she watched the television in the suite. Julian was on CNBC. He was sitting in a leather chair, looking serious and capable, a complete fabrication. The rumors of financial trouble are just that. Rumors, Julian lied to the interviewer. The Sterling Wyatt family has always been the bedrock of this company. My great-uncle Harrison trusted us. When I take over as CEO on Saturday, we are going to streamline. Cut the fat. Cut the fat, Eleanor murmured at the screen. That means firing workers to pay for his yacht. "And your personal life?" the interviewer asked. "Rumor has it you're settling down?" Julian smiled, that fake, practiced smile. "Yes. Clara and I, we're a power couple. You need a partner who understands the burden of wealth. Someone who belongs in this world." Eleanor felt a flare of anger, but she pushed it down, compressing it into fuel. "Mr. Thorne," Eleanor called out. The lawyer was working on a laptop in the corner. "Yes? I want to buy something." "You own a multinational conglomerate, Eleanor. You can buy anything." "No, I mean right now. Julian mentioned he's trying to buy the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue. He's been bragging about it for weeks. He says he's closing the deal on Monday." Thorne tapped on his keyboard. "Unit 92B, yes. It's currently on the market for $85 million. Julian has put down a deposit, contingent on his inheritance clearing." "Buy it," Eleanor said. "Cash. Today." Thorne looked up. "That is a significant expenditure for a prank." "It's not a prank," Eleanor said, turning to the mirror and smoothing the midnight blue silk. "It's an eviction notice. I want him to find out he's homeless the same night he finds out he's jobless." Thorne chuckled. "Done. I'll have the deed in your name by 5:00 p.m. By Friday night, everything was ready. Eleanor stood on the balcony of the plaza, looking out at the city lights. She felt different. The girl who counted coupons for ramen was gone. The girl who cried in the rain was gone. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an old number. "Julian. Hey, I know things ended weird, but no hard feelings, right? Hope you're doing okay. Maybe you can find a guy who's more your speed, like a barista or something. Take care." He was rubbing it in. He wanted to make sure she felt crushed. He wanted to make sure she knew her place. Eleanor didn't reply. She simply deleted the number. "Miss Vance?" Marco called from the bedroom. "The necklace just arrived from the vault. It belonged to your grandmother. The Star of the East sapphire." Eleanor walked back inside. The necklace lay on a velvet cushion. It was a massive, deep blue stone surrounded by diamonds. It was cold and heavy when Marco clasped it around her neck. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't Eleanor the archivist. She was Eleanor Blackwood, and she looked terrifying. "Are you ready?" Thorne asked, standing by the door in his tuxedo. Eleanor picked up her clutch. Inside was the Alpha Trust document and a single, crisp $1 bill. "Yes," she said. "Let's go crash a party." The Pierre Hotel ballroom was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. It smelled of expensive perfume, stale ambition, and the faint, metallic scent of desperation masked by champagne. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, largely ignored by the swarm of New York's elite who were too busy trading gossip and business cards. At the center of the room, near an ice sculpture of a swan that was slowly weeping onto a silver tray, stood the sterling Wyatts. Beatrice was indeed wearing gold, a sequined monstrosity that made her look like a disco ball wrapped in barbed wire. She held court with a glass of Pinot Grigio, her face pulled so tight by recent surgeries that she looked permanently surprised. Alistair was puffing on a cigar that was strictly forbidden indoors, but no one dared correct the man who claimed to own the building. And Julian looked handsome. It was a cruel trick of nature. He wore a bespoke tuxedo, his arm firmly around Clara. Clara was wearing white, a lace gown that cost more than a house in the suburbs. She was beaming, flashing a massive diamond ring on her finger, a ring bought, Eleanor knew, on a credit line that was about to snap. They're engaged, Eleanor realized, standing in the shadowed archway of the entrance. A cold pang hit her chest, but it wasn't heartbreak. It was the icy clarity of a sniper adjusting their scope. He wasted no time. Eleanor signaled the maitre d'. He was a stiff man named Claude, who had once looked at her thrift store coat with open disdain when she tried to deliver a message to Julian weeks ago. "I'm sorry, miss. This is a private event," Claude began, not looking up from his clipboard. "I believe I'm on the list," Eleanor said. Her voice was low, smooth, and dripped with money. Claude looked up. He took in the midnight blue gown that fit like a second skin. He saw the star of the East sapphire blazing at her throat. He saw the way she held herself, not like someone asking for permission, but like someone granting it. Of course, madame," Claude stammered, terrified despite not knowing who she was. "Right this way." Eleanor moved into the room. The transformation was magnetic. As she walked, conversation died. Heads turned. Former colleagues of her father, socialites she had seen in magazines, people who would have looked right through Eleanor the archivist, now parted like the Red Sea. They didn't know her name, but they knew power when they saw it. "Who is she?" she heard a woman whisper. "Is that the Italian heiress everyone is talking about?" "My God, look at those diamonds. That's vintage Cartier." Eleanor kept her eyes locked on the stage. Titus Thorne was already there, standing in the wings, obscured by a heavy velvet curtain. He caught Eleanor's eye from across the room and gave a barely perceptible nod. The music faded. The room quieted as Alistair Sterling Wyatt stepped up to the podium, practically shoving the event coordinator aside. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alistair boomed, his voice slurring slightly from the scotch, "thank you all for coming. Tonight is a historic night. For too long, Blackwood Industries has been rudderless, a ship without a captain. But tonight, we correct that course." Applause rippled through the room, polite, obligatory clapping from people who feared Alistair more than they respected him. "As the closest living relatives to the late Harrison Blackwood," Alistair continued, puffing out his chest, "my family has borne the burden of his legacy. And tonight, we are proud to announce that the board has officially recognized our claim. We are taking the helm." Beatrice waved regally from the floor. Julian and Clara kissed for the cameras, a picture-perfect moment of stolen glory. "Furthermore," Alistair shouted over the applause, "my son Julian will be stepping in as CEO effective tomorrow morning. His vision will lead us into the future." Julian jogged up the steps to the stage, flashing that winning smile, the smile that had fooled Eleanor so completely. He took the mic. "Thank you, Father," Julian said smoothly. "It's an honor. And I want to say, success isn't just about money. It's about breeding. It's about knowing who you are. We are the future." He raised his glass. "To the Sterling Wyatts." "To the Sterling Wyatts," the crowd echoed. "One moment," a voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but it was projected with such absolute authority that it silenced the room instantly. Julian froze. The crowd turned. Eleanor was walking down the center aisle. The crowd split instantly, creating a pathway straight to the stage. She walked with a slow, predatory grace. Click, click, click. "Who is that?" Beatrice hissed, squinting through the glare of the spotlights. Eleanor didn't stop until she reached the base of the stairs. She looked up at Julian. Up close, she could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. The stage lights were hot, but he looked suddenly very cold. "Excuse me," Julian said, his smile faltering. "We're in the middle of a private announcement." "Security?" Eleanor laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. "Security won't help you, Julian. Not this time." She stepped up onto the stage. She stood next to him, towering in her heels. She turned to the crowd, then looked back at Julian. "You don't recognize me, do you?" she asked softly. Julian squinted, looking at her eyes. He looked at the necklace. He looked at the dress. Confusion clouded his face. Should I? I guess the lighting was different at Le Cuckoo, Eleanor said. And the rain. It's amazing what a little dry weather and $12 billion can do. Julian's face went pale. His jaw dropped. Eleanor? A gasp went through the front row. Beatrice stood up so fast she knocked her chair over. The librarian! That's impossible! Eleanor! Clara shrieked from the side. What is she doing here? Why is she wearing that? Eleanor ignored them. She turned to the microphone. My name, she addressed the crowd, is Eleanor Vance. Until yesterday, I was an employee at Archives and Origins. I fixed old papers. I mended broken history. She paused. The room was dead silent. You could hear the ice melting. But while mending those papers, I found something. I found the history of a man named Harrison Blackwood. A nervous murmur went through the crowd at the mention of the dead billionaire. Mr. Sterling Wyatt here claims to be the closest living relative, Eleanor said, gesturing to Alistair, who was turning a dangerous shade of purple. He claims he has the right to the company because of his name. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the folded paper. She snapped it open. The sound was like a gunshot. This is the Alpha Trust, she announced, signed by Harrison Blackwood 2 weeks before his death. Witnessed by Titus Thorne. Thorne stepped forward from the shadows of the stage, holding a thick legal binder. I can verify the authenticity of this document, he said into the mic, and I represent the estate. And what does it say? Julian demanded, his voice cracking. That you get a payout? Fine, we'll write you a check. Now get off the stage. It says, Eleanor read calmly, that the Sterling Wyatt family is explicitly disinherited. You get $1. She reached into her purse, pulled out a crisp $1 bill, and tucked it into Julian's tuxedo pocket. Don't spend it all in one place. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. Then, pandemonium. You're lying! Beatrice screamed, scrambling up the stairs. She looked deranged, her gold dress shimmering as she clawed at the air. She's a fraud. She's a pauper. She shops at Goodwill. I saw her coupons. Security! Alistair bellowed, his face turning the color of a bruised plum. Remove this woman. She's hallucinating. 2 large security guards stepped forward, looking uncertain. Titus Thorne stepped between them and Eleanor. Gentlemen, Thorne said, his voice calm but steely. If you touch her, you are assaulting the owner of this building, the owner of the security firm that employs you, and the woman who signs your paychecks. I suggest you stand down. The guards froze. They looked at Alistair, sweating and raving. Then they looked at Eleanor, cool and regal. They stepped back, crossing their arms. Beatrice reached the podium, her face twisted in rage. You little rat! You think you can walk in here and steal my life? I'll ruin you. I'll sue you until you're begging on the street. I have lawyers. I have credit. Eleanor looked at Beatrice. She didn't flinch. She felt a strange sense of pity. You can't sue me, Beatrice, Eleanor said. You don't have the money for a lawyer. Beatrice scoffed. We have millions. You had access to credit based on the expectation of this inheritance, Eleanor corrected. Mr. Thorne? Thorne nodded, checking his watch. As of 10 minutes ago, the banks were notified of the existence of the Alpha Trust. The lines of credit extended to the Sterling Wyatt family have been frozen pending an investigation into attempted fraud. Your cards are declined, Beatrice. All of them. Beatrice's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. She fumbled for her clutch, pulling out a platinum Amex. She stared at it as if it had turned into a snake. Julian, who had been standing in shock, suddenly seemed to wake up. The gears in his head turned frantically. He looked at his parents, hysterical, broken, and now destitute. Then he looked at Eleanor, radiant, powerful, and infinitely wealthy. He pushed past Clara, physically shoving his fiancée aside. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice dropping to that seductive whisper he used to use on her in the stacks of the archives. He reached out to take her hand. "Eleanor, wait. This is amazing. Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor stared at his hand as if it were covered in slime. "Tell you what, Julian? That you were, one of us." He laughed nervously, running a hand through his hair. "Baby, look. I know things got heated at dinner, but that was just pressure. My dad, you know how he is. I had to play along. But us? We had something real. We can run this together, king and queen, just like we talked about." The audacity was breathtaking. The entire room watched, fascinated. The cameraman zoomed in. Clara let out a sob from the side of the stage. "Julian, we're engaged. You bought me a ring." Julian didn't even look at her. "Eleanor, please, don't throw away what we had over a misunderstanding. I love you." Eleanor looked at him. For a second, the room held its breath. Would she take him back? Then she laughed. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Julian," she said. "It was a test, and you failed." She pulled her hand away. "You laughed at my income," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "You mocked my clothes. You left me in the rain because I didn't fit your aesthetic. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of yourself reflected in someone you thought was smaller than you." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "Well, I'm not small anymore. And you? You're just a man with a $1 inheritance and a very expensive bar tab." She turned to the crowd, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "Enjoy the party, everyone. The drinks are on me. But the Sterling Wyatts," she pointed to the door, "are trespassing. Please escort them out." The security guards moved. This time they moved toward Alistair and Beatrice. "No, you can't do this," Alistair shouted as he was grabbed by the arms. "Do you know who I am? I am Alistair Sterling Wyatt." "Used to be someone," a guest in the front row muttered loud enough to be heard. Beatrice was weeping, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets. As they dragged her past the chocolate fountain, her heel caught on the red carpet, and she stumbled, losing a shoe. She didn't stop to get it. Julian tried to maintain his dignity. He adjusted his cuffs, glaring at the guard reaching for his elbow. He looked back at Eleanor one last time. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You don't know how to be rich. You're just a librarian playing dress-up." Eleanor leaned into the microphone. "And you, Julian? You're currently homeless. I bought the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue this afternoon. I believe your deposit is non-refundable." Julian's eyes went wide. The color drained from his face completely. That was the final blow. He slumped, allowing the guard to drag him away. As the doors closed on the screaming Sterling Wyatts, the room erupted. It started with a slow clap from Titus Thorne. Then the board of directors joined in. Then the socialites. Then the waiters. Within seconds, the ballroom was thundering with applause. Not polite applause. Real, raucous, thunderous applause. They loved a winner. And Eleanor Vance had just won the game of the century. Eleanor stood center stage, the lights washing over her. She took a deep breath. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding in the archives. She was making history. "Now," she said to Thorne, "let's get to work." Monday morning at Blackwood Tower was usually a sleepy affair. Executives would roll in around 10, nursing hangovers from weekend golf trips. But on the first Monday of Eleanor's reign, the lobby was buzzing at 7:30 a.m. Eleanor arrived not in a limousine, but in a sleek, black town car. She walked through the revolving doors wearing a tailored grey suit, business, not gala. Titus Thorne was at her right hand. "Good morning, Miss Blackwood," the security guard said, standing straighter than he had in years. "Good morning, Frank," Eleanor said, reading his name tag. "How are the grandkids?" Frank blinked, stunned that a CEO acknowledged his existence. "Doing well, ma'am. Thank you." When the elevator doors opened on the 50th floor, the atmosphere changed. The executive suite was filled with people who looked like they were waiting for a firing squad. These were Alistair's cronies, the yes men, who had helped him drain the company coffers. Eleanor didn't go to her office. She went to the conference room. "Everyone, sit," she commanded. They sat. "For the past 20 years, Eleanor began, standing at the head of the table, this company has been treated like a personal piggy bank for the Sterling Wyatt family. I spent the weekend reviewing the books. I'm an archivist by trade. Do you know what archivists do?" Silence. "We notice when things are missing," she said. "We notice gaps in the record." She threw a stack of files onto the table. "Shell companies in the Caymans, consulting fees paid to firms that don't exist, corporate jets used to fly poodles to Paris." She looked at the VP of Finance, a man named Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, you signed off on a $200,000 invoice for office supplies last month. Since when do paperclips cost as much as a Ferrari?" Henderson began to sweat. "It was an accounting error. It was theft," Eleanor said. "Security is waiting for you in the hallway. You and half the people at this table are fired for cause. Mr. Thorne has already forwarded these files to the district attorney. I suggest you get lawyers." As security escorted the weeping executives out, the real work began. Eleanor didn't just want to fire them, she wanted to rebuild. She promoted the quiet workers, the assistants who actually did the work, the junior analysts who had been ignored. By Wednesday, the company stock had jumped 15%. The market loved a cleaner house, but the Sterling Wyatts weren't done yet. On Thursday afternoon, Eleanor was reviewing blueprints for a new library initiative when her secretary buzzed in. "Ms. Blackwood, there's a disturbance in the lobby." Eleanor checked the security feed on her monitor. It was Julian. He looked rough. His hair was unkempt, his designer jacket was wrinkled, and he was shouting at Frank, the security guard. "I need to see her. She stole my life. I have rights." Eleanor sighed. "Send him up, but keep security with him." 5 minutes later, Julian was thrown into her office. He didn't look like the golden boy anymore. He looked like a desperate man. "Eleanor," he panted, straightening his jacket. "Thank God, these gorillas wouldn't let me in. Look, we need to talk. My dad. The FBI raided our house this morning. They took everything. Computers, phones, even my mother's jewelry." "That's standard procedure in an embezzlement investigation, Julian," Eleanor said, not looking up from her paperwork. "Embezzlement! It was creative accounting," Julian shouted. "Look, you have to stop this. Mum is having a breakdown. We have nowhere to go. The banks took the townhouse. They took the cars. And I need a loan," Julian said, his voice cracking. "Just a few million, to get us back on our feet. I'll pay you back, I swear." Eleanor finally looked up. She took off her glasses. "A loan," she repeated. "We were practically family," Julian pleaded. "Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means everything," Eleanor said. "It means I know exactly who you are. You're the man who watched me count pennies for soup and laughed. You're the man who thinks creative accounting is an excuse for stealing from pension funds." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "I won't give you a loan, Julian, but I will give you a job." Julian's eyes lit up. "A job? Yes. Executive VP, brand ambassador." Eleanor turned around. "Janitor." Julian stared at her. "What?" "The night shift janitor for the mailroom is retiring," Eleanor said. "It pays $18 an hour. Full benefits. It's honest work, Julian. Something you've never done in your life." You can't be serious," Julian sputtered. "I'm a Sterling Wyatt." "Not anymore," Eleanor said. "Now, you're just a guy who needs rent money. Take the job or get out." Julian looked at her with pure hatred. Then he looked at his shaking hands. He thought about the cold streets outside. He thought about his empty bank account. "Where do I sign?" he whispered. 1 year later, the sprawling gardens of the Kensington estate were in full bloom. It was a crisp autumn's day, the kind that made New York feel magical. Eleanor stood at the podium, but this time the crowd wasn't filled with socialites and sharks. It was filled with teachers, librarians, historians, and students. "My mother, Amelia Vance, taught me that history isn't just about kings and queens," Eleanor said to the crowd. "It's about the quiet people, the ones who build, who mend, who care. She never had money, but she left me a richness of spirit." She cut the red ribbon. "I am proud to open the Amelia Vance Institute for Historical Preservation. This facility will ensure that no story is ever lost to time, and that education is free for anyone who seeks it." Applause rang out. Real warm applause. After the ceremony, Eleanor walked through the crowd, shaking hands. She spotted a familiar face near the catering tent. It was Clara. The girl who used to wear diamonds was now wearing a simple department store dress. She was working the event, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Eleanor stopped. Clara froze, gripping the tray tight. "Miss Blackwood," Clara said, lowering her eyes. I'm with the catering company. I can leave if—" "It's fine, Clara," Eleanor said gently. "The crab cakes are excellent. Good work." Clara looked up, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry. For everything. Julian. He was wrong. We were wrong." "Where is Julian?" Eleanor asked. "He quit the janitor job after a week," Clara sighed. "He said it was beneath him. Last I heard, he was in Florida, trying to sell timeshares. We don't talk anymore." Eleanor nodded. "Take care of yourself, Clara." "You too, Eleanor." Eleanor walked away, toward the back of the estate where the private cemetery lay. She opened the iron gate and walked to 2 headstones side by side. Harrison Blackwood, beloved. Father Amelia Vance, beloved mother. Eleanor knelt down and placed a single white rose on each grave. "We did it, Mum," she whispered. "We cleaned it up. The money isn't a weapon anymore. It's a tool." She sat there for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees. She wasn't lonely. She had a company to run, a foundation to lead, and a life that was entirely her own. She looked down at her hand. She wasn't wearing the massive sapphire necklace today. She was wearing a simple silver watch, the one her mother had given her for high school graduation. It ticked steadily, a reminder that time was the only true currency. Eleanor Vance, the girl who counted coupons, was gone. But Eleanor Blackwood, the woman who knew the value of $1 and the price of a soul, was just getting started. She stood up, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked back toward the house. Her phone buzzed. It was Titus Thorne. "The board is ready for the quarterly projection, Eleanor. Shall we begin?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, Titus. Let's begin." And that is the story of Eleanor Vance. She taught the world that true wealth isn't about what you wear or what you drive. It's about character, resilience, and how you treat people when you think no one is watching. The Sterling Wyatts learned the hard way that when you laugh at someone's humble beginnings, you might just be laughing at your own boss. Did you enjoy this story of justice and karma? If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Let me know in the comments. If you were Eleanor, would you have given Julian the janitor job, or would you have left him on the street? I read every comment. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.